Hey guys, so it's Miss Anderson again. So today we're going to start with informational text. And so when we're talking about informational text, we're talking about nonfiction passages or selections or excerpts that we're going to be reading in class. Now remember, when we're talking about fiction, and if you guys don't already know this, we'll discuss it in a later video, but when we're talking about fiction, we are looking for passages that follow a plot diagram, passages or selections that follow a plot diagram. So if it qualifies as nonfiction, that's going to mean that it does not follow a plot diagram. And if it's informational text, that means it is going to explain a topic with facts, statistics, or expert information, right? So informational text is trying to teach you something. It is explaining a topic to you, okay? And we're going to talk about that word topic here in just a minute. We're going to be using this bookmark. It's called MSI whenever we're doing informational text. So whenever you see an informational text, the first thing that you need to write on it is MSI. This is a quick way for me to know that this is informational text, and I am looking for the main idea, supporting details, and then I'm going to make an inference. The only other thing that we do with informational text passages besides the main idea, supporting detail, and making an inference is this right here, text structure identification. So yesterday you guys watched a video about the 5 different types of text structure. So you're going to have MSI, and then you're going to, underneath it, in this blank, you will then write for me, what is the type of text structure we are looking at, okay? So the first thing that we have on MSI is the M for main idea, okay? So as we're going through, we're going to be thinking, what is the text about? What is the topic of this text? And then we're going to be looking for those supporting details that back up that main idea. That would be text evidence, right? Text evidence that we're looking for. Any evidence in the text that supports your main idea, that would be considered a supporting detail. Okay, and then an inference, making an inference. This is background knowledge plus information in the text. So you're taking your background knowledge that you as a reader already have, and you are adding it to the information that's given to you in the text. This equals an inference. Guys, please remember that inferences are never found in the actual text. They are generated or created by you, the reader. They come from you, your brain. Okay, so these are the things that we're looking for when we're looking in informational text. The next big thing, if I could get all of you to do this, it would be the greatest thing ever. If there is ever background information above a passage, always read that background information. Okay, so I'm going to read the background information to you first. All right. In the early 1900s, flying in aeroplanes or airplanes, fixed-wing self-propelled flying machines was a bold undertaking. Male pilots were dashing heroes. However, female aviators, especially African American women, had to struggle for acceptance. Patricia and Frederick McKissack wrote more than 100 biographies and other nonfiction books, most focusing on the achievements of African Americans. So if we weren't sure that this was going to be an informational text, we now know, because it says biographies are informational text, and then other nonfiction books. So we know we're looking at nonfiction. If we're looking at nonfiction, we're looking at MSI, main idea, supporting details, and making an inference. Okay, then the title of our passage is Women in Aviation, a history writing. Okay, a history writing. So it's informational text. We're supposed to learn something as we're reading this text. Okay, when it says Women in Aviation, what does this title, what does it give us a big clue to? It gives us a big clue to our topic, okay? So women in aviation is our topic. That is not the main idea, guys. That is not the main idea, okay? But it is our topic. The formula that I have always used to come up with a main idea. Okay, main idea equals topic plus author's main point about the topic. Okay, so if our topic is women in aviation, now we are going through and we are going to find what is the author's main point about women in aviation, because that is going to give us our main idea. Main idea is a sentence, okay? Main idea is always a sentence. Topic can be a word or, a grouping of words. Is not necessarily a sentence, but main idea is always a sentence. Topic plus the main point the author's trying to make about that topic, okay? So we know we're learning about women in aviation. All right, so we're going to chunk this passage, which means that I'm going to make a mark in the passage as to where I'm going to stop reading, and we're going to start talking about the pieces that we're looking at, okay? So I'm going to stop, right here at paragraph 6, okay? That's going to be my first chunk. And then my next chunk is going to be paragraph 11. That'll be my next chunk, okay? And then my next chunk, I'm going to stop at 15, okay? And then I'm going to read 16 through the end, will be my very last chunk. And then if you chunk it like this too, you're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4 chunks. That doesn't seem that bad, right? All right, so we're going to look at 4 chunks of passage. Okay, I have a lot of different colors, so we're going to say that our main idea, when we're looking for that, we're going to do that in pink, okay? Our supporting details, we're going to look at that in green. And then when we're trying to make that inference, that's going to be in this color, red, yeah, I guess. It doesn't really matter. You can use whatever color you want. Okay, so let's get started reading. American aviation was from its very beginnings marred with sexist and racist assumptions. It was taken for granted that women were generally inferior to men and that white men were superior to all others. Flying, it was said, required a level of skill and courage that women and blacks lacked. Yet despite these prevailing prejudices, the dream and the desire to fly stayed alive among women and African Americans. The story of women in aviation actually goes back to the time of the hot air balloons. A number of women in Europe and America gained fame for their skill and daring. Sophie Blanchard made her first solo balloon flight in 1805. She grew in fame and was eventually named official aeronaut of the empire by Napoleon. By 1834, at least 20 women in Europe were piloting their own balloons. Though she did not fly, Catherine Wright was a major supporter of her brother's efforts. Orville so appreciated his sister's help that he said, "When the world speaks of the Wrights, it must include my sister. She inspired much of our effort." Although Raimondi de la Rocha of France was the first woman in the world to earn her pilot's license, Harriet Quimby held the distinction of being the first American woman to become a licensed pilot. On August 1st, 1911, Quimby, who was described as a real beauty with haunting blue-green eyes, strolled off the field after passing her pilot's test easily. To the male reporters who inundated her with questions, Quimby fired back answers with self-confidence, walking past a group of women who had come to witness the historic event. Quimby was overheard to quip, with a smile and a wink, "Flying is easier than voting." The women's suffrage amendment wasn't passed until 1920. As difficult as it was for women to become pilots in significant numbers, it was doubly hard for African Americans, especially black women. That's why Bessie Coleman, the first African American to earn her pilot's license, is such an exciting and important figure in aviation. Okay, so we're going to stop there and we're going to talk about what we've just read. Okay, so what kind of a main idea can we come up with in this chunk that we just read? Okay, so we're going to put our little M here. What kind of a main idea are we coming up with? That women in aviation, I can't spell today, overcame many challenges. Okay, so the reason that I came up with this is the main idea for what we've read so far, is that as we're going through, we know our topic is women in aviation. Main idea is topic plus author's main point. Look right here. It says, yet despite these prevailing prejudices, the dream and desire to fly stayed alive among women and African Americans. And so as we're going through, we see, I'm supposed to do supporting details in green. We see that these details here support our main idea, or this sentence helps us to infer what our main idea is, where we say that, women in aviation, they had to overcome many challenges. As we go through, we have much more text evidence to back that up, right? When we talk about the hot air balloons, there's not a whole lot of challenges that they talk about in that paragraph, however. And then it says that she was inundated, because it says the male reporters who inundated with her with questions, meaning that they asked her lots and lots of questions because they didn't think that she, should have been able to do this. So we have all these examples, right? So all in here, we have examples of women. Okay, so that would be text evidence, examples of women who overcame challenges. That's what we have in these first 6 paragraphs. We have examples of all these women who overcame challenges and became pilots. When it says here that the women's suffrage amendment wasn't passed until 1920, and we're talking about the year 1911, women's suffrage was the women's right to vote. And so until that was passed, women were not allowed to vote in the United States. So this woman, Quimby, she actually was the first American woman to become a licensed pilot, and she was flying in 1911, which was before she even had the right to vote in this country. Okay, and so these are our main idea, and our inference, of course, is that women are having to overcome many challenges. We are assuming not necessarily assuming, we are making the inference that the author, his purpose in this whole section, this whole passage, is to explain to us about women overcoming challenges. Now, when we move into our next set, we're going to focus on just one, okay? All right, so Bessie Coleman was born in 1893 in Atlanta, Texas, the 12th of 13 children. Her mother, who had been a slave, valued education and encouraged all of her children to attend school in order to better themselves. The encouragement paid off because Coleman graduated from high school, a feat not too many black women were able to accomplish in the early 1900s. Bessie Coleman refused to accept the limitations others tried to place on her. She attended an Oklahoma college for 1 semester but ran out of money. Accepting the offer of one of her brothers to come live with him and his family in Chicago, Coleman found a job as a manicurist. She fully intended to return to school after saving enough money, but she never did. While in Chicago, she learned about flying and made a new set of goals for herself. She wanted to be a pilot. Coleman learned about flying from reading newspaper accounts of hot air balloons during World War I. She tried to find a school that would accept her as a trainee, but no American instructor or flying school was willing to teach her. When the war ended, a friend, Robert S. Abbott, the founder of the Chicago Defender, one of the most popular black-owned and operated newspapers in the country, suggested that Coleman go to France, where racial prejudice was not as restrictive as it was in America. Even though the United States was the birthplace of flight, it was slower than other countries to develop an organized aviation program. European leaders immediately saw the commercial and military advantages of a strong national aviation program. Bessie knew from her reading that both French and German aircraft were among the best in the world. Coleman had also read about Eugene Jacques Bullard, the well-decorated and highly honored native of Georgia who had become the first African American to fly an airplane in combat as a member of the French Lafayette Flying Corps during World War I. Other blacks had gone to Europe to get their training, too. Coleman realized that if she were ever going to get a chance to fly, she, too, would have to go to France. But she didn't have any money to get there, and besides, she couldn't speak a word of French. Okay, so our main idea still being that women in aviation had to overcome challenges, we are still looking for more text evidence, more supporting details that back up that main idea that we've come up with, that inference that we have. Okay? So when we're looking at challenges that they had to overcome, her mom was a slave. Okay, so there's a challenge. And then our supporting detail, sorry, I should just put that as a challenge, right? So her mom had been a slave. So do we think that we can infer, we can make that inference that was probably a very big challenge that Bessie had to overcome? Okay, she was able to graduate from high school. She graduated from high school. She went to college. She did not, however, she ran out of money. So there's a challenge, right? And then she wanted to return to school, but she couldn't, found out about being a pilot. So she wants to become a pilot. Okay. But she finds out that no American instructor or flying school was willing to teach her. So what's she gonna do? She wants to go to France, right? Racial prejudice in France is not nearly as restrictive, so she feels like she can go over to France, and she knows that that's where the best planes are. But what other obstacles does she have to overcome? She doesn't have any money to get there, and she can't speak French. Okay, so she's got to overcome these obstacles. So these are the obstacles that she's now having to face. All right. For almost 2 years, Coleman worked part-time as a manicurist and as a server in Chicago chili parlor and saved every penny to finance her trip to France. Meanwhile, she learned to speak French, so when the time came, she'd be able to understand her instructors. In 1921, Coleman made it to France, where she found an instructor who was one of Tony Fokker's chief pilots. Fokker, the famous aircraft manufacturer, said Coleman was a natural talent. On June 15, 1921, Coleman made history by becoming the first black woman to earn her wings, thus joining the ranks of the handful of American women flyers. Returning to the United States, determined to start a flying school where other African American pilots could be trained, Coleman looked for ways to finance her dream. There were very few jobs in the aviation industry for women or blacks. She soon learned that there was little or no support for a black woman who wanted to start a flying school. To call attention to aviation and to encourage other women and African Americans to take part in the new and growing field, Coleman gave flying expositions and lectured on aviation. She thrilled audience with daredevil maneuvers just as Quimby had done before her. Along with racism, Coleman encountered the burden of sexism, but she made believers out of those who doubted her skill. The color of my skin, she said, was a drawback at first. I was a curiosity, but soon the public discovered I could really fly. Then they came to see Brave Bessie, as they called me. All right, so she has another issue that she has to overcome, right? She has to overcome racism because she's African American, and she has to overcome sexism. Okay, so these are also supporting details that back up that main idea that we have, that women in aviation had to overcome many challenges. Okay, so this is just, giving us an explanation of different things that she's done after she becomes a pilot. She did overcome the challenge and she learned to speak French. She saved every penny to finance her trip, and then she makes it, right? She goes to France and then she comes back, and she is called Brave Bessie now, right? Okay. Last section. The strict rules and regulations that govern aviation today didn't exist during the first 3 decades of flying. For example, it wasn't uncommon for aviators to ignore safety belts and fly without parachutes. One of these simple safety precautions might have saved the lives of both Harriet Quimby and Bessie Coleman. On a July morning in 1912, Quimby and a passenger named William P. Willard set out to break an overwater speed record. When Quimby climbed to 5,000 feet, the French-made Blériot, monoplane suddenly nosed down. Both Quimby and Willard were thrown from the plane and plunged to their deaths in the Boston harbor. The New York Sun used the opportunity to speak out against women flyers. Miss Quimby is the 5th woman in the world killed while operating an aeroplane. 3 were students, and their number thus far is 5 too many. The sport is not one for which women are physically qualified. As a rule, they lack strength and presence of mind and the courage to excel as aviators. It is essentially a man's sport and pastime. 14 years later, Bessie Coleman died in a similar accident, with almost enough savings to start her school. Coleman agreed to do an air show in Florida on May Day for the Negro Welfare League of Jacksonville. At 7:30 p.m. the night before, Coleman, accompanied by her publicity agent, William Wills, took her plane up for a test flight. When she reached an altitude of about 5,000 feet, her plane flipped over. Coleman was thrown from the plane and plunged to her death on April 30th, 1926. Wills died seconds later when the plane crashed. Once again, critics used the tragedy to assert that neither women nor blacks were mentally or physically able to be good pilots. Women are often penalized by publicity for their every mishap, and Amelia Earhart, the most famous female pilot in aviation history, said that. The result is that such emphasis sometimes directly affects a woman's chances for a flying job, Earhart continued. I had one manufacturer tell me that he couldn't risk hiring women pilots because of the way accidents, even minor ones, became headlines in the newspapers. Although Bessie Coleman died tragically, her plans to open a flight school for blacks were continued by those she had inspired. Okay, so we finished the passage. There's one more thing that I want us to look at. Right here, it said, I had one manufacturer tell me that we couldn't risk hiring women, okay, because even the minor accidents made the headlines, just like over here where we have this obstacle that they really had to go up against, where it says women are not physically qualified, right? And they lack strength and presence of mind. So it's a man's sport, right? So there's another obstacle that women have to overcome. And down here, when Amelia Earhart is talking about how she herself had one manufacturer tell her that he couldn't hire her because if a woman had an accident, it always made the headlines. Okay, so why do you think he would say that? What inference can we make because he's saying that? It wasn't worth the risk for him, right? It wasn't something, it wasn't worth the risk to give a woman a chance. Okay, so women had many different obstacles that they had to overcome. They had, if they wanted to be successful pilots. And then both of these women who were pioneers meaning the first ones to do it in the sport, right? They both ended up dying. All right, so we've got our MSI, right? We found the main idea. We found supporting details, we underlined those, we made inferences about taking chances on women, right, and women overcoming the things that were put in front of them. So now the last thing that we need to do when we're finished reading an informational text is you have to tell me what type of informational text it is, right? So remember right up here underneath MSI, we put that line so we could tell us what type. Now the first chunk that we read, it gives us the descriptions of many women who were involved in aviation, but the majority of the text, okay, is what we're going to go with. And the majority of the text would be chronological, right? It goes in order of the things that Bessie went through, right? So we call it sequence or chronological order. They're the same things, but it spends the majority of the text explaining to us about Bessie and her life and the things that she did. So it's chronological. It's explaining the steps that Bessie had to go through to overcome her challenges, right? Because our main idea, remember, is women in aviation overcame many challenges. So this is how we will break down an informational text passage. In In the next assignment that you'll see in the module, you are going to take a short quiz over this. As we were going through, you should have been following along with me and making all the annotations that I was making. If you did not, you might want to rewatch and you might want to write them down because you are allowed, of course, to use this passage, the one that we marked up together, on your quiz. So, best of luck on the quiz. If you have any questions at all, please send me an email in the inbox, or again, of course, you can always jump on my office hours today.